I begin my journey by spawning into the world and admiring the very beautiful scenery of the shrublands, which looks extra amazing thanks to the complementary shader pack. First, I placed a waypoint indicating where the spawn was. Afterwards, I chopped a tree down and gathered the wood from it, making a crafting table and some sticks, which I then used to make a wooden pickaxe to mine stone. I proceeded to break the unwritten rule of only mining 3 cobblestone and making a stone pickaxe, but when I did craft it, I mined more cobblestone to make myself a full set of stone tools. I then spent the rest of day 1 slaughtering any animals that crossed my path while I was exploring. I wanted to see what the mod pack has to offer in terms of different biomes and structures. So I had some food set to cook, I hopped in my sleeping bag and slept the night away. After my first night's slumber, I wanted to explore the surrounding land and mark anything noteworthy. And if you notice, the day counter still reflects day 1, so allow me to add some clarification. Now, assuming you don't sleep through the night, a normal day and night cycle lasts roughly around 20 minutes. Now, if you were to sleep, it would obviously progress to the next day, but I'm not counting it like that. And instead, I'm going to be going by in real life time. So that means I'm going to be spending 33 hours in this world. I continued my adventure on foot and spotted a single house in the open field and was immediately interested. I made my way over and I was surprised to see it was not abandoned and instead someone was living there. His name is Stuart. Now, he seemed like a nice person, but after a little chit chat, I had to be back on my own journey, and I promised to come back and talk some more with him. And look at this little raccoon I found. He wanted some steak, so who was I to say no? And I wish I found out that you could tame them sooner because I would have loved to have a little pet raccoon. I also came across this tavern and poked around inside until I found a conduit ruin map. Now, I looked at the map, put it in my pocket, and completely forgot about it. I was getting a little discouraged about finding a place to live. There were some nice locations, but they were also isolated and desolate, and I didn't want to end up like lonely old Stuart. I've been alone for almost all my life, and I didn't want any more nights alone. But after a little more traveling, I found what I was looking for, an oak village. But upon my arrival, since I was an outsider, everyone had to quarantine to make sure they didn't catch any effects from me, which I totally understood, so I picked a place near the end of the village and claimed it as mine. In full disclosure, I do have cheats enabled, so I will be able to teleport freely back and forth between locations. This is just more fun to me, and it's a mechanic used in other games, but anyway, enough coping. So with a suitable location for my home now found, I needed to go and acquire better resources. So I mined down and stumbled across a big cave that was able to provide me with plenty of iron. I headed back up to the surface and smelted some iron to upgrade my gear, and I went back to the cave and I was able to find a new structure that was similar to an end stronghold but not quite the same. And there were some chests in there that gave me some good resources, including diamonds. It was even connected to a different structure which seemed to be an expanded upon mine shaft. I even found a backpack that had already been upgraded to the iron tier, which allowed for more storage space and to continue to enable my hoarding problem. On day 4, I decided that I was done being homeless and wanted to make my house finally, so I spent the rest of the day and the whole next day getting enough resources. I wanted to keep the materials somewhat close to the original feel of the village, but with a little added flair as well. So I decided to use oak, stone, stone brick, as well as some cobbled deep slate. I had a blueprint for the house I was going to be building, so thankfully it didn't take too long. I started building the house on day 5 and was finished with it by day 8. It was bare bones on the inside, but that wasn't too important to me at the time. All that matters is now that I am an official homeowner. And with that done, I realized that I barely had any iron left. And with my iron dwindling down, I decided it was best to make a farm to infinitely spawn iron golems. And luckily, I had just enough to make it. And I had 3 villagers eager to donate themselves for the betterment of the village. Now, I did have some difficulties building this, but they were all mistakes on my end. Like, I forgot to put the boat down to trap a zombie one time. Later on, I even trapped a different zombie, but I forgot to name them and they despawned, and I had to trap another one down there. And I also turned off fire tick just so the farm wouldn't look ugly by being in constant flames. But now with an unlimited source of iron secured, I was able to strip mine to my heart's content. And I was actually able to find diamonds this time around, which I was definitely going to need if I wanted to go to the nether. With all the diamonds that I acquired from my mining trip, as well as the diamonds that I already had, I was able to craft a new set of diamond armor and a new diamond machete as well. I was also making it an emphasis to go and slay any endermen that I saw on my minimap, just so I can make it to the end dimension a little bit easier. With the obsidian that I mine, I made the nether portal and stepped in. And one thing about me, it doesn't really matter what armor and weapons I have, because as soon as I step into a nether, you best believe that my butthole will be puckered up in fear. Can you blame me? Because look what happened upon my arrival. Invisible? He was invisible! I don't know how that was possible, but it definitely didn't inspire any courage in me to continue my expedition. But with that cheater handled, I wandered aimlessly but carefully until I eventually found another fortress. I found a blaze spawner and spawn camped any blaze that came out, and they almost got the better of me quite a few times, I can't lie. But once I got enough rods, I immediately made my way out. I would explore the additional structures once I felt comfortable enough to do so, but it definitely wasn't right now. With my blaze rods in hand, I headed back to the overworld, where I encountered something outside my house, but I wasn't quite sure what it was. What the fuck is that? Oh my god, what is that, bruh? It's so fucking fast. I would later come to find out it was actually a Komodo dragon, and it was very fast and very damaging. It made me quiver in fear inside my house, but thankfully they must have realized how powerful and fearsome I was, because when I went outside, they were never to be seen again. Now I'm sorry, but I messed up all of this footage that you're about to see. I somehow had everything zoomed in, but I'll give you a recap of what happened for the next few days. I spent a little while looking through all the recipes and building furniture for the inside of my house, but with that I was able to build a functional kitchen, dining area, as well as a cozy little bedroom. And outside, I learned that the hanging sign I made for my house actually had its own physics, so I had a little bit of fun boinking my head on that a few times. I also built myself a farm using lava and dripstone. This was my first time building this type of farm, and let me just say, it is an absolute must-have. In combination with the iron farm, so you can make all the buckets, you quite literally have an indefinite amount of fuel. Next, I wanted to start the construction of my basement, and after getting a very rough layout down, I abandoned that project and instead opted to go fight the Ender Dragon. I wanted to do this pretty early on because after seeing how efficient Enderman farms are for XP, I didn't want to make the seemingly inefficient regular mob XP farm. So after a day of following the Eye of Ender, I made it to my destination and began my descent downwards. And on my way to the fortress, I found a different structure. There wasn't anything too useful in the chest besides some golden apples and a diamond, and I almost died when I accidentally stepped on this pressure plate and set off the TNT underneath it. I then made it into the actual end fortress, and after 35 minutes of aimless wandering and looting, I was luckily able to finally find the portal room. Unluckily though, there was only one Eye of Ender in the portal, so that meant I didn't have enough to enter yet, but I was done playing for the day. Thankfully though, the next time I logged in to record, I must have noticed my recording mistake, and now we're back to a normal POV. I placed the Ender Eyes that I had on me and headed back home to acquire more. After acquiring enough, I headed back to the stronghold to finally go and defeat the Ender Dragon. Though I've already seen how the end dimension looks with mods and shaders, I was still captivated by its beauty, but I knew I couldn't be distracted and I had to be focused on my goal. I was able to destroy the crystals relatively easily and only had one more to go. Everything was going smoothly until it wasn't. Now let's just stop right here so I could explain what was going through my head. 1. I couldn't believe that after all my work this was going to be how I died. It wasn't a hardcore world, but I still didn't want to die. 2. I knew that I had an ender pearl in my inventory that I could use to clutch this if I was fast enough. And you best believe that I'm fast enough. Okay, so I might have lied, okay? I wasn't fast enough to do it. Instead, I rage quit. And it wasn't out of rage, it was more so in disbelief. But it was the worst thing that I could have done. It had consequences that I didn't even know were possible. I spawned back home and grabbed whatever leftover gear I could scrounge together, and I headed back to redeem myself. When I entered again, I thought it was a little weird that the Ender Dragon no longer had a health bar, but I just figured it was some minor bug. But after cowering in the tower waiting for the dragon, I noticed that the dragon had it perched in like 10 minutes. With my frustration building and my hope going down, I called upon a god to help me. I prayed that Notch would help me out, and to my surprise, he did. He granted me the unbelievable power of invincibility and even the ability to fly. But all of this newfound power I was feeling was only temporary. But with the dragon now slain, the gateway back home didn't appear. I tried a few ways to get back home, such as placing the ender crystals down to maybe get the dragon to spawn again and I could redeem myself, but the mods changed the orientation in which you needed to place them down and I couldn't figure it out. And of course, portals didn't work, and falling out of the void definitely worked, but that wasn't a good way to get back home whenever I needed. Notch wasn't going to stand by idly and watch one of his chosen ones be trapped in the end, so he granted me the ability to phase in and out of the end dimension whenever I needed to. Now, if there's one thing that I learned from playing Skyrim all this time, it's that bugs are present in the game and mods only exasperate that fact. But with that settled, I then went ahead and gathered all the resources I needed to build an Enderman farm, and I had to make a mini Enderman farm just to get to Ender Pearls as I would need them to spawn an Endermite. The build was pretty easy to follow along to. The worst part was getting an Endermite to spawn in, but eventually I was able to get one to spawn and push them into the cart. Now getting the cart back to where I needed it was another thing entirely. He actually managed to push me off into the void, but I somewhat cheated and teleported onto the land so I could save all my stuff. You don't like it? Sorry. Not really. But don't worry, because once I came back, I once again died to an angry Enderman. So there's your revenge, and now we're even. But I managed to persevere and finish building the farm and was ready to farm XP until I was fully enchanted. So I spent a lot of time struggling to get a maxed out enchanted sword. And the cool thing about this farm is that there's actually a mod which introduces stronger variants of the enemies from time to time, and they drop a backpack with loot in it, and we are actually able to get some strong enchanted items from it. Now that I had enchanted pickaxes, I wanted to break them in and go strip mining again. But first, I had to get some food because ultra mining drains a lot of your hunger, so it requires a good amount of food to do it for a while. And I ended up coming out with 26 diamonds. It's not a lot considering I had fortune, but it was definitely more than I had before. Also, and for some reason, I went to go get a backpack full of endstone. I don't remember what my plan was for all of this because I didn't end up using any of it. I spent some more time exploring and marking more of my map, and sadly I had nothing to really show for it. I wasn't able to find any of the big new structures, so I ended up just going back to enchant more of my gear and hopefully max out my sword this time around. And like I mentioned before, sometimes there will be special mobs that drop a backpack when killed, and from one of them I was able to get a really good diamond chestplate with protection for Unbreaking 3 and even mending on it. And from different backpacks I was also able to get an enchanted diamond sword and shovel. And I promise you I'm not cheating when I show you these, I'm simply just showing you the very lucky ones I get. I've gotten my fair share of backpacks that have garbage like an iron shovel with only Curse of Vanishing on it. And as I was grinding for my gear, I was getting very unlucky with the enchantment table, and I was curious just as how many endermen I defeated, and it was up to the 2000s. But days later and thousands of endermen slain by my blade, I now had fully enchanted gear. It wasn't quite the best enchantments, but it was close enough. So with some high level gear now acquired, I had some ideas for what I wanted to do next. I wanted to build a crop farm, so first I made a regular mob farm, mainly that way I could use the bones for bone meal, and this had me thinking maybe if I just built this farm earlier on, I would have had enchantments and wouldn't have died against the ender dragon. I sat AFK and played some chess until I eventually had a few stacks of bone meal under my belt. I then headed back home and terraformed some nearby land and made it to my liking, that way I could begin building my crop farm. Now this farm did take a few in-game days to build, but I think it was well worth it. It was practical and I think it was pleasing to look at. So after I was done building, I spent some time planting and growing some crops, that way I could use them to make some good food items using one of the new mods. But to make these new food items, I had to have the main ingredient in a lot of the recipes, which is meat. So now I started construction on my animal farm. And if you couldn't tell by now, I absolutely love to build, and of course that requires a lot of resource gathering. But because of this mod pack, it makes that aspect of the game so fast, and I genuinely don't think I'll be able to play regular Minecraft after this. And as a quick little side note, there are mods that include new mobs, and some of them drop new items, but you can find bisons roaming around, and with looting 3 on a sword, you could get so much steak from a herd of them. I began to build my animal farm, and despite it being nowhere near as big as my crop farm, it still took the same amount of time to build it, if not longer, and that was mainly because I just couldn't settle on the aesthetic of the farm, but it came out looking decent in the end. But after some time, I was able to finish the build and just look at the difference in graphical quality with and without shaders. I said it again and I'll say it again. I don't think I can go back to playing Minecraft without all of this. This mod pack and shaders have truly changed the way I'm going to play the game. I also just made a quick pit stop back to the Enderman farm, that way I could enchant my diamond hoe and transform her into a diamond housewife. I came back and then went ahead and started to lead some animals over to my farm, and a smile just formed across my face as I looked at my building from a distance. Everything just looked so beautiful and I was so proud of myself. Now with almost everything I needed, I was only missing a few key ingredients, so I went to a rainforest to grab some wild rice to grow, and then I headed to a beach to find cabbages to grow. But on my way, I found this mob called a mauler, and for some reason I right clicked on him and fed him my maxed out diamond sword. And if you could tell, I was just absolutely in awe of what happened. Like, did he just eat my sword? And sadly, upon death, my sword didn't drop. So of course, that meant it was back to the Enderman farm for me. And luckily, I was able to get a pretty decent first enchantment, but sadly no looting. I would end up coming back for that enchantment when I needed it, so it wasn't too big of a deal. My next grand idea for the village was to build a village breeding hall. That way we could increase the number of villagers. So once again, I would need to gather some willing participants to devote their lifetime to breeding. I had some difficulty getting them in boats, and I was actually surprised to find out you couldn't put a lead on them. But I guess that makes sense. But in case you were wondering, if you are on some select versions of Minecraft, there is a mod you can use to fix that, but I wasn't on any of the supported versions, sadly. I also had some difficulties with this build getting the villagers in the location where they were supposed to be, and that also ended up in some villager bloodshed, and it was getting me so frustrated to the point where I actually scrapped this build design and I built a different one, which thankfully ended up working just fine. And now that it was properly set up, I was thinking about making it look pretty, and I did add a few details to it, but I wanted to have this building to be ugly and a mystery amongst the uninformed, because if this information got out to neighboring villages, it could undermine everything we build, knowing that everyone here is more closely related than one would think. And I thought a good way to use all the new villagers we were going to have was to force them into a lifetime of servitude, so I decided to next build a villager trading hall, and some days later it was fully built, and while I was busy building, the villagers had been busy growing crops and making love, so as soon as I was done, I was able to gather some lucky villagers into a lifetime of selling goods. But I'm not a terrible person, because I let them keep the minecart, that way they wouldn't be forced to stand. But prolonged sitting can also be detrimental to someone. So maybe I am a bad person. And to my surprise, this was already starting to look pretty good, because as I was bringing over the rest of the villagers, I reset this villager's occupation once, and on their second offer, I was able to receive a mending trade. But it's not all sunshine and rainbows, because I didn't know that you had to lock in a villager's trade, so you can imagine the surprise and confusion I felt when I came back later on and I discovered the trade was no longer there. And as a reward for myself for how nicely everything was coming together, I went ahead and strip mined some more, and this time around I was able to come out with nearly 2 stacks of diamonds. But now it was time to do something I've been putting off for the longest time, which was building the basement of my house, mainly that way I can have a proper storage area. And if you're anything like me, you absolutely hate spending the time organizing your chest because of your own messy doing. But I couldn't lie, the sense of achievement you feel after having everything organized is pretty nice. Now I think I managed to achieve a pretty nice balance between aesthetics and efficiency. I have an absolutely absurd amount of chests, but I thought it better to have too many instead of not enough. And for chests that will need a lot of space, I upgraded them to a diamond chest. I also left some areas not fully built because I plan on making a portal room that holds the portals to all of the different dimensions in the mod pack. And now it was time for the fun task of bringing all of my stuff from the outside to the inside, and allow me to read you all a quote by Jordan Peterson. If you can't even clean up your own room, who the hell are you to give advice to the world? I believe this is an amazing metaphor for taking control of your life. By cleaning your room both literally and not so literally, you're giving yourself a proper headspace to think by decluttering your living space. And after that Herculean task of properly organizing everything, I was surprised to discover I had quite a bit of time left. I had set out everything I planned to do already. I also built a bounty board and I was completing all the easier ones just as a way to pick up some additional emeralds for trading, I probably should have did this a little bit earlier, but it's better late than never. I wanted to spruce the village up a little bit, so I went ahead and made a water fountain, and I would also normally build a statue of some sort displaying the dragon egg, but if you remember the whole situation in the end, I obviously didn't get a dragon in, so I couldn't do that sadly. Next, I wanted to go and find some cabbage, that way I can make all of those extravagant food recipes I was talking about, because if you remember, I never got to after accidentally feeding my sword to that mauler, so I went to go and find some. I also found this fisherman, and after some small talk, he urged me to take some of his freshly caught fish for my use for cooking. And while I was doing some exploration, I also found this well, and thankfully they weren't hostile, so I was able to help get them back into the water. And as I went back to the Enderman farm to get my previously mentioned upgrades as well as some additional ones, I looked through the quest and man is there a lot to explore. So if you guys show me enough love on this video, I'll definitely be sure to come back to this world to explore more and complete more quests. I mean, I'll be here regardless, just please show your support on this video, especially if you've been watching up until now. You have to like it or you're just the ultimate hater and I respect that too. Eventually, I went back home and spent my time growing my crops so I could finally make those new food recipes, and I spent an unbelievable amount of time crafting everything, but I would be lying if I said I didn't enjoy doing so. I'm honestly ashamed of myself for eating such regular, boring food for so long. After cooking everything up, I spent some time upgrading and organizing some backpacks before I left. I wanted to see what new structures I could find, and I'd hopefully be gone for a while, so I wanted to make sure I had everything I needed. And before I fully left, I decided it was time to challenge the nearby gorillas to a fight, and even with pretty good gear and weapons, they were still very tough to defeat, but they stood no chance with the old hit 'em from a place where they can't hit you strategy. Now sadly, I didn't seem to have good luck with my terrain generations as I had in other worlds. The only thing I seemed to be finding was a bunch of different illager outposts regardless of the biome, but with my gear, there weren't really any close scenarios and it proved to be a great way to get emeralds. And while exploring, I found a bear and I sadly had to put it down. I love bears so much, so that really hurt to do, but there were some wolves nearby that I needed to tame, and I think this was my first time ever coming across some, so I needed to domesticate them and bring them to their new home. And as I said, I ended up coming across a lot of different illager locations. While it was a little annoying not finding any variety in them besides the biomes that they spawned in, it did prove to end up being a lot of emeralds, and this last one I found was by far the coolest one. It was decently big to explore and it had good personality to it, but the bottom part of it had random floods everywhere, and that's either because they had major plumbing issues or because the structure generated in a river biome and that messed everything up somehow. But I continued to swim my way through the structure and systematically cleared each area of any illagers as well as grabbing any loot I found along the way, and it was actually a lot I came home with. Most notably, I now had around 4 stacks of emeralds, and learning from my past mistakes, I made it an effort to not put off any organization and started to clear out my backpacks and place everything where it needed to be. And as I was putting everything away, a wave of disappointment washed over me as I thought back on my exploration, as I previously had a world that I tested out to make sure the mod pack was working, and there were so many cool structures that I was hoping to explore in this world, but hopefully in the future we'll be able to come across some of them. But I wasn't going to let this keep me down, and instead opted to go back to the nether to find a bastion to get a template so I can finally make netherite armor. And luckily, I was able to look at my map pretty closely and headed to somewhere that looked like it could possibly be a bastion remnant, and I was thankfully right and was able to get my hands on a smithing template. I hate the nether, and even with all of my armor and good gear, I still do, but my achievement of the smithing template encouraged me to do some more exploration, which led me to a nether mine shaft, and there I encountered some minor ghost spirits, and they are passive until you try to hurt them, then they turn hostile. I was also able to find a god apple that I confused for a regular golden apple. Oh, that's a god apple! So I was shift clicking it like stack it. That's a god apple. So next up, of course, was ancient debris farming, and with enchanted pickaxes, food that gives you full nourishment, and an efficient mining mod, it was way easier to find some than traditional bed or TNT mining. And now with netherite, I transformed my equipment with mending on it. I also did some exploration of how the advanced netherite mod works and figured it out. And as I said, I didn't want to turn anything into netherite unless it had mending on it. So I went to the trading call and I was going to reroll trades until I got mending once again. But I did not realize how impossible this was going to be. I didn't truly realize how lucky I was until this. I got it on my second try and now I was getting trades for Curse of Vanishing or Curse of Banishing. I did get some good ones along the way like Sharpness 4 and Efficiency 5, but man was this grueling. Now, I tried and tried to get the mending trade legit again, but I couldn't. I was at it for a good hour and a half. And look, you can expect full transparency from me. Seeing as I had it once before and I didn't know you had to lock in the trade, I used the command block to spawn the trader with the desired trade. So if you don't like that, I'm sorry, but at least I was honest about it. But there we have it. That was 100 days in better Minecraft. And if you're still here, I really appreciate you watching the video until the end. And if you enjoyed the video, be sure to comment, like, and subscribe. But if there's any questions, comments, concerns, or snarky remarks, leave them below and I'll get back to you. Thank you once again, and have a great rest of your day.